Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Densel, and I host Unfound, and I run this YouTube channel. I realize you don't want to give a thumbs up to the following video until you watch it. You know what? That's totally understandable. I can appreciate that. But what you can do right now is subscribe to this channel. The button is right there. Thanks. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Unfound Now, Unfound's monthly series where I get to talk about recent disappearances, something we do not do on the podcast that plays on iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere else. The recording of this episode is happening on August 28th, 2022. Today, I will be discussing, analyzing the disappearance of Gregory Peterson from Cloverdale, California on July 17th of 2022, so approximately a month and 10 days ago. He is a white male. He is either 61 or 62 years old, depending on what information you might see, but I'm not sure how much that really matters in this particular disappearance. You should know there's not a lot of information out there about Greg's disappearance. In fact, it seems like there's one article that is on like 10 different media sites, and including, I even went to Web Sleuths, kind of the same thing. In fact, there's only 2 entries for Greg's disappearance there. So it certainly deserves a little more attention, and we're going to try to do that with Unfound Now today. Before I go any further, I hope you will consider subscribing to this channel. That is the button right down there in the corner where I was just pointing. Been doing very well this summer with new subscribers. It seems like just yesterday we went over 13,000, and then it seems like yesterday we just went over 14,000. We're getting a lot closer to that 15,000 number, which is something I never could have imagined. So please consider subscribing. I think some of you are going to be maybe finding the channel for the first time. If you're watching me, this could be the first time that you even knew that this channel existed. Please subscribe. I think you're going to like it. So what are the reasons that Unfound Now exists? I go through this every time, but the reason I do this is because I realize new people are finding this channel all the time. Number one, publicity. Any disappearance. I don't care if it's Brian Schaefer's, which is really well known, or Mar Murray's. Maybe deserves a little bit more media attention, because you never know when that attention might push just everything over the edge, new ideas, new searches, new information, and to solve any disappearance. Either it's a really well-known one or one that's not so well-known or hasn't got a lot of coverage, somewhat like Greg Peterson's that I'll be talking about today. Number two, here at Unfound, we are all about education. I myself, even though I've been doing this 6 years, I'm learning new things about disappearances all the time. And I don't mean information necessarily about specific disappearances, just about the overall community, the overall environment. I'm learning things about that all the time. I try to pass along everything that I learn onto all of you. So Unfound Now, just like the regular podcast, once again, is all about education. New theories, new ideas. How can we look at different disappearances maybe in new ways to make them more solvable? And then number 3 is insight, that initial insight. When we at Unfound read a disappearance story for the first time, how do we look at it? Because a lot of times those initial stories don't have a lot of information there. How do you read between the lines? What are the things that we should be looking for? What are the things that are missing in stories such as those? And how do we fill in the blanks without being told those things? Do we have enough information? Do we have enough experience to do that? So once again, with all of the Unfound Nows that we've done, and I think this might be episode 27. I've been doing this since the summer of 2020, so over 2 years. That's what I try to do. Try to give you my insight, and of course, my assistants do the same thing. When they read disappearance stories, they're the same way. How do we read them? What do we see? What do we don't see? What we don't see, and what can we do about that? How do we fill in those blanks using other disappearances as templates? And you also know, if you've been following Unfound now for a while, is that I always bring three specific insights for that episode, and I apply those to that disappearance for that episode. For today, here are the three, and I'll be talking about these later after the map section of the video. Number one, what isn't said. Number two, that word, quote unquote, suspicious. And number three, and I think I've used this title before, and I've been saying this a lot lately, disappearances are about people. So I'm going to go to the map section of this video, going to show you point A and point B that I believe are the most important points for Greg's disappearance. Going to offer you some insight. I'm going to read an article while you are looking at the map. And then I'll come back to the camera to go over those three insights, and then I'll give you a little analysis at the end. Be back in a moment. Okay, let's take a look at this map for the disappearance of Gregory Peterson. What makes this a little difficult is both points for his case are a little vague, a little nebulous. So please keep this in mind. I'm going to do the best that I can here, but get into this later when it comes to lack of information and trying to read between the lines. I'm going to read an article. Pretty much there's just one, although you can go to different websites to read about Gregory's disappearance, different media sites, they all basically say the same thing. So just keep that in mind if you're going to go do some Google searching yourself. So I'm going to read from this article while at the same time pausing to show you these different points. Then I'm just going to offer up some observations, and then we'll get back to you seeing me on the screen, and I'll go through the three learning points for this Unfound now. Now, if you're wondering where Cloverdale is, I'm just going to zoom this out very quickly. And you can see that it's very north in California. I mean, San Francisco is way down here at the bottom of the screen, and I know for me, I consider San Francisco to be in very, very northern California. But as you can see, it's not. We got San Francisco, then Sacramento, and all the way up here we got Redding. We got a ways to go before we get to Oregon. But still, this is a location up above San Francisco even. And in fact, it's in that area of Humboldt County, which we know is kind of notorious. And how many disappearances have we covered from there? At least one, and maybe we might even be able to put a second one in there if you want to put Jeff Joseph's disappearance in there. But that is where Cloverdale is. And this is Cloverdale right down here at the bottom of the screen. You can see it right there. Cloverdale River Park and Cloverdale itself. So I'm going to read this article starting right now. The Sonoma County Sheriff's Office is asking the public for help finding a missing man who vanished under quote-unquote suspicious circumstances. I'll be talking about that later. More than a month ago, and his car was found on fire. Gregory Peterson, 62, I think more accurately, I think he's 61, of Cloverdale, has been missing since July 16th. And for anybody who's viewing this video down the road, I'm doing this recording on August 28th, 2022, so a week or a month and over a week since Gregory's disappearance. So, the article continues. At around 4 a.m., Gregory Peterson left his home in the 3000 block of Highway 128, which is over here. And you should know I tried to look up his exact address, could not find that. It seems that he has a post office box. So there may be a physical address out there if, for example, he's getting a refrigerator delivered. But for purposes of the government, mail and such things, he has a post office box. I could not find anything that anything where he is connected to this. So I just have to go by what the article says that this is true. So this is the 30,000 block. I might have said that wrong before. The 30,000 block of Highway 128, which is this that runs right there. And this is the 101 right here. You can tell it's kind of a rural area. And if you go out into this area, you'll see what I mean. I'm not going to go do a street view for this. But you can tell it's a little bit out in the middle of nowhere, even though there are these little towns, Ingram, Yorkville, off to the west. So that's where his home is. And Peterson was believed to have been contacted by an unknown acquaintance who had vehicle issues and needed assistance, the sheriff's office wrote. So he's here, and allegedly somebody contacted him, hey, I'm having car problems, can you come help me out? And this happened at 4 a.m. This is going to be very important for it later in this video. So after that, presumably Greg gets in his car to go help this person out, of course does not return. So then on July 17th at 11 a.m., so we've gone now from July 16th at 4 a.m. to July 17th at 11:30 a.m., so now we're talking like 36 hours later. And see, this is where it's hard to determine, because on one hand, am I thinking was it actually July 17th when he got contacted and his car was seen 7 hours later? Or was it really 24 hours, then an additional 7 hours later? It's still a question mark, even, like I said, almost a month and a half later. But on July 17th at 11:30 a.m., his vehicle was found burning on Highway 101 north of Cloverdale. So this is Cloverdale right down here at the bottom of the screen. This is the 101. This point that I picked out on the 101 is just an example, just for use of this video. I have no idea exactly where his car was. His car could have been down here closer to Cloverdale. It could have been up more north away from Cloverdale. I have no idea. Somewhere north of Cloverdale on the 101 is where his car was, on the side of the road, presumably right on the side of the 101, burning. You should know, you probably suspect 101 is not an isolated road, fairly busy road, not like the I-15 down in Southern California, the highway that I'm very familiar with, going back and forth between Las Vegas and LA. But the 101 has some cars on it. Certainly not some isolated country road. So once again, on July 17th at 11:30 a.m., his vehicle was found burning on Highway 101 north of Cloverdale. Peterson has not been seen or heard from since, according to the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. Peterson was described as 6'3", weighing 200 pounds. Anyone with information about his whereabouts is encouraged to call the Sheriff's Office Investigations Unit at 707-565-2185. And a reward is up to $2,400 that's being offered by the Sonoma County Alliance Community Engagement and Safety Rewards Fund. The reward is for information leading to Peterson's whereabouts. If foul play was behind his disappearance and a crime occurred, the reward will be given for information leading to the arrest of the person responsible. All right, so once again, to go through this, he's over here at his house, presumably, gets texted, gets called, gets a Facebook message. We have no idea. He leaves, and then sometime later, like I said, it's a little vague. Was this 7 hours later between 4 a.m. and 11:30 a.m., or was it really a day later? Because that would then, start that, and then, of course, our suspicions and expectations and beliefs and theories and conjecture and everything else could certainly go a whole different, a lot of different routes. But with just 7 hours, what makes more sense to me is that it was the same day, that he got called or got contacted at 4 a.m. on July 17th, and then 7 hours later, his car ends up on the 101 burning. That makes more sense to me, but that's not what the article says. So, Another question I have regarding all of this is that I will give you an example from my recent life. I drove, as many of you know, I went from Florida to Illinois for the Masters World Championships for disc golf. Stayed with my long time very good friend Dave and his family at his house in Peoria. And I drove from Florida to Illinois. Then I went over and saw my father, stopped to see my sister, went over to Pennsylvania, saw my father, and then eventually came back to Florida. Drove a lot of miles, like 3,500 miles. I think I saw at least 2 burning cars on the side of the road. Now, they weren't, maybe one of them was burning when I passed, and then there was another one that it was like it was over. It's going to happen. It's the summer. You're driving 3,500 miles. You're going to see things like that. You're going to see wrecks, although maybe not see it happen. I saw a tire blow out on a car right beside me. You're going to see these types of things on all those miles. So what is a little confusing to me, though, regarding this is if this is a busy road and there is a burning car there, did not somebody see somebody walk away from the car? Or see somebody jump out of the car? It seems to me that the 101 would be a busy enough road, going back to that road, the 101, that it would be busy enough that it would be really hard to try to time something like this. Let's just say that somebody staged this and wanted the car to burn. I suppose there are ways to start a burn in a car that wouldn't be obvious to start. You kind of light some fabric on fire or something inside of the car, and then you walk away, and it wouldn't be obvious that the car was really burning in maybe 10, 15 minutes. Certainly possible. But it just seems, if you're trying to dispose of a car, and there was some sort of foul play here, why would you just choose to put that car right there on the highway for everybody to see? As we know with disappearances, usually what happens is that either the car is parked in like a parking garage where it kind of blends in with everything else, or the car is left in a very remote area that it takes a while to be found. Or sometimes we've covered, of course, some cases where cars aren't found at all. The person and the person's car are still missing. So this is still a big question in my mind. As how could this car be burning on the 101 and no one sees someone leaving the scene, since it's a fairly busy road. My belief, my understanding of this area, even though I've never been to this area, but the 101 though is a known highway in California. I think we also have to take a look at the surrounding area. That should you to believe that something else went down, let's just say that Greg did this himself, something was going on in his life, that it's not hard to imagine that if he did set fire to his own car, that could he have done it on purpose and walked up into these mountains to the east, to the west? Very difficult areas to search. I don't know if any searches have been done, and none of us would be surprised if somebody could walk off into those mountains, whether not really understanding what they were doing or being suicidal or something, and not be found ever. I don't think that would surprise any of us. So I'm open to that as well. But once again, we come back to how would somebody not see that on the 101, especially if this car was burning at 11:30 a.m. Of course, it's well after the sun has risen. Surely the fire didn't get started like before the sun came up and somebody didn't notice it till 11:30. Surely whoever set this car on fire, did it very close to the time that it was noticed. So let's say at the latest 11 a.m. And I'm certainly open to the idea that a car could catch fire all by itself, but then what are the odds that a guy goes to help somebody and then his car just happens to catch on fire as well, and this acquaintance has never come forward, and Greg is also missing. So I think we have to believe that this car was set on fire on purpose by someone. That seems to make sense. So once again, this is seemingly where Greg was. From this alleged contact, he goes to help somebody, and then at some point, many hours later, or even a day and some hours later, his car is found right there on the 101, car burning. Of course, obviously nobody in it, no remains in it. And we're left to wonder what happened. All right, so allow me to get back on the camera now for me to finish the rest of this episode, where I'm going to talk about those 3 points I mentioned earlier in this episode. Okay, we're back. Before I get into those 3 insights, 3 learning points for this particular Unfound now, I just want to tell you a little bit more about where you can find Unfound. We, of course, had the discussion group and the page on Facebook. We have a Twitter account, an Instagram account. We have the website, theunfoundpodcast.com. And as you also saw at the beginning of this video, this little trailer that I'm now putting in, the new trailer, I guess you might call it, I hope you will consider becoming a member of this channel for the low price of 10 cents a day. It's the join button down there. So not just become a subscriber to this channel, but join, help us. I'll be just frank with you, financially, for the low price of 10 cents a day, $3 a month. What do you get for that? You get these Unfound Now episodes a week early. You get the regular episodes that come out on Friday a day early. And it's the YouTube link that will be given out. It'll be unlisted at that time. You also get daily video updates from me. I've been doing those since like the end of February, the beginning of March, where anybody who is a member, a subscriber, or a member, a paying member, I guess you might call it, I let everybody know what's going on with Unfound that day. What did I do? Some of the things I'm working on. Provides everybody a little bit of like behind the scenes. And I try to pick out some different places in my condo here to do that. Sometimes I'll be out in the balcony. Sometimes I'm in my car doing those updates. You never know where I might be. It might be interesting to you. I don't know how many other podcast hosts provide so much behind the scenes material like I do. And then also, if you tune into the live show on Monday nights, you get to use some cool emojis that nobody else gets for the low price of 10 cents a day. Of course, we also have patreon.com, where you can read all the blogs that I write there. You can become part of the think tank, get some free books, things at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, or PayPal, paypal.me/Unfound Podcast. And if you're new to Unfound, never heard of it before until today, you can find Unfound on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, a whole host of different places. And of course, Unfound is technically a Spotify podcast. I've been with them, hooked up with them since late February of this year, 2022. All right, let's get to those 3 insights, 3 educational points that I want to talk about and use those. Use Greg's disappearance as an example. I'm also going to be talking about some of Unfound's disappearances that we have covered over the past 6 years. We're coming up on the 6th anniversary next week. Can't believe it. Number 1, what isn't said. This has been common on some previous Unfound Nows, where you have a disappearance that it's a couple months old and you can only find 1 or 2 articles and they really don't say a lot. Seems to be a common thing. I'm not sure why some disappearances get a lot of information. They might talk about cell phones and even give names of the last people to see that missing person. And then you have something like Greg's, where it's pretty much, except for the dates and a couple times, it's pretty much all up in the air. This is a very bare bones case. And by the way, if you see me looking off to my left, your right, I do not do these Unfound Nows off the top of my head. I do use at least a few notes. But what isn't said, and we have to start looking at what information don't we have? And that information, we have no cell phone info. I think it makes all the sense in the world to think that Greg Peterson in 2022 had a cell phone. We have no cell phone information. 99.99% of adults have them. Unless they're, of course, some cultures are anti-technology. I get that. Some primitive cultures in some areas of the world don't even have electricity. I get that. But for everybody else, they pretty much have a cell phone. We don't have any information regarding Greg's cell phone usage at this time. We don't know how he was contacted. We don't know if he was emailed, texted, called. We just don't know. Does Greg live with anybody? This is left out. I tried to figure out if he was married or not. Could not find that out. Given that in the map section I talked about how he has a P.O. box, I couldn't even figure out if he was living with somebody. Is he living on his own? These things are unclear. And then you start to think about, well, if he lives by himself, then how does anybody know that he was contacted about some, once again, suspicious or unknown acquaintance contacted him if he lives by himself? It would seem to me that would mean that he didn't live by himself. But then why is this acquaintance unknown? Would not Greg, as he was going out the door to whoever was living with him, it was a partner, maybe a parent or a child, would he have said, hey, my buddy John Smith called me, he's stuck on the 101, I'm going to go see what's up? Would that information not be out? I think a lot of times it would be, especially this long after the disappearance occurred. Is something we have to think about. Now, you should know, how does this, so what else is not in there? We have to start thinking about, well, how is it that, as I mentioned in the map portion of this video, how is it his car got burned right along the 101 and seemingly nobody saw anything, at least according to the reports? How is that possible? In broad daylight, on that date, would have been well after the sun was up, nobody seemed to see anything. How does somebody light a car and get away with it? And why, on top of that, why would somebody light a car, if there was foul play, why would somebody put that car right on the side of the road and torch it? Did it run out of gas? Did they not realize it was running out of gas? We can start throwing a lot of ideas around. It just doesn't seem like the best of choices. And I would add, on top of everything else, cars these days do have a lot of material in them that don't burn as well as maybe a car that was built 50 years ago. We know cars burn, of course, but it takes a while. So what are we to believe regarding that? So a lot of these things are still unknown. And so that's what you have to look at. When you're looking at a disappearance story like this, you should start maybe even doing a checklist, maybe even typing these things out. Depends how much you want to get into disappearances. This is what I do. But when I talk to somebody for the first time, a person who's eventually going to be on the podcast, I will listen to them. I will talk to them. I'll ask them questions. I'll listen to that conversation again. But constantly, I will be typing out, these are the things that are missing. Why are these things missing? Why is this news missing? Why is this information that we should have not there? Why is it unknown? So we have to think about Greg's disappearance in the same way. Now, even with these disappearances we cover for the podcast, they are a lot of times very old, and we still run across the same things. And just some examples. Very recently, we covered the disappearance of Belinda Brewster. She disappeared from the San Francisco area in late 1990, early 1991. We just do not have a lot of information about her. A lot of things put together. Belinda had some issues going on in her life. She didn't have a job. She was a little bit transient. She might have been a sex worker, maybe had some drug issues. But still, we still had one major piece of information, is that this lawyer of her husband was trying to track her down because the husband was trying to serve her divorce papers. Still, all these years later, that's about all we have, but I was able to track that lawyer down, so that at least it's something. So we do run across that. Christopher Hyde. Now, you should know this disappearance from the early 2000s, right here in the Tampa/Orlando area. His remains were eventually found over in Tampa. No foul play is believed to have occurred, but that was a disappearance. When we originally covered it in 2016, not a lot of information about Christopher Hyde's disappearance, and that's still the same way all this time yet later, even though his remains have been found. And then another one, Devin Brown Busetta. This is a disappearance I covered in 2019. She disappeared from Pittsburgh, and the reason there isn't a lot of information known there is because she was new to that city, hadn't made a lot of friends, didn't know a lot of people, and her car was found parked at this gas station. Not a lot of information there either, even though that disappearance is many years older than Greg's, although I don't think it's as old as Christopher's and Belinda's. So we do run across this in the regular podcast episodes, even though we really cover older ones. It happens. And so still, you have to have those skills to look at a disappearance, all the information is known, and see where the holes are. Other than just, well, this is unsolved, we wish we knew who did it or whatever happened, but just those facts that we usually have that you don't. Why is that? All right, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when we get to disappearances or about people. Number 2, that word suspicious. I hate it. I got to admit. Certainly I do use it when talking about not necessarily the disappearances themselves, but the way some people have acted in some of these disappearances. That doesn't necessarily mean that these people are the person who caused the disappearance. It just seems to me that a person is acting in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so the words I usually use is paradoxical, perplexing, illogical, doesn't make any sense, irrational, in contrast to the word suspicious. Now, all of you should know that in my world, suspicious is a marketing term. It's not what I would call a conclusive, objective term. To me, you see a lot of this on YouTube for titles, The Suspicious Disappearance of John Smith. Well, someone could argue all disappearances are suspicious, right? And if they're all suspicious, then there's no reason to use the word suspicious. It's like that line, what was it, from The Incredibles? If we're all unique or special, then none of us are special at all, something like that. It's kind of the same thing. And so I don't like that word. So when I read it in a news article, now you should know in that article, and you may Google it and find it yourself, it said suspicious circumstances. Well, I'm not sure 6 years in, 264 disappearances covered, plus the Unfound now, so that makes it about 290. I'm still not sure what suspicious circumstances, what that term means. Suspicious in a dictionary sense means, I'm going to read it because I typed it out, causing one to have the idea or impression that something or someone is of questionable, dishonest, or dangerous character or condition. You could say that about any disappearance, depending on the information known. So, and I have to tell you, in looking at Greg's case, from my experience, and reading this one article, which seems to be the only one, are these I can't have that problem with that word, suspicious circumstances? They're just circumstances. They may be hard to understand. How does a guy go out saying he's going to help a friend and his car end up burning on the 101? That's puzzling. It's not suspicious to me. So I don't know, and that's why I continue to think that suspicious is just a word. It's just meant to catch your attention. And I would resist that. If you're going to be interested in disappearances and want to solve them, they shouldn't have to be what you would call suspicious or puzzling or anything else. Take an interest in them because there's somebody out there, there's a family out there who wants answers. That's why you take an interest, or not because they're quote-unquote suspicious. Now, as far as the word puzzling and perplexing, things that seem paradoxical or lack logic given what we know about human behavior, I can name some examples from Unfound's history, some from Unfound's catalog. Chase Lackey, this is a disappearance we just covered within the past month. His sister took a picture of the inside of his apartment. A few days later, his mother went to his apartment, took a picture, and things had been altered, even though it was not believed that anybody had entered that apartment in the meantime. Chase had seemingly already disappeared. So who went in there and took some things, replaced the phone? If you don't know what I'm talking about, please go listen to that episode. You'll see what I mean. Now, those things, that's perplexing. It's puzzling. I think I have an idea who did that, but I'm not going to say that publicly. But these are the kind of the weird things. It's not suspicious. Somebody might have had a perfectly logical reason. Maybe it was Chase who did it. Then it wouldn't be suspicious, right? So, Jason Jolkowski, his disappearance. I don't know, it's suspicious. He might have run off to start a new life. It wouldn't make it suspicious. It's puzzling. Why? Because he was walking in a safe neighborhood in broad daylight in Omaha, Nebraska, walking about, I don't know, a quarter of or half a mile from his house to a high school to get picked up from work or for work. Never arrived. No idea. Nobody has any idea. Disappearance is what? 20 years old, over 20 years old now? A very unique, rare type of disappearance. But certainly not suspicious. Certainly puzzling. You know, how does that happen? And then we have Pamela Golden. This is another a good example. The reason it's puzzling is because she just talked to her sister about going to get some boxes. Her sister gave her directions. You're supposed to go out of this parking lot, make a left. A minute later, Pam got in her truck, went out. Instead of making a left, she made a right, never to be seen again. Her truck was, though, eventually found right down the street. Nobody knows why she made a right instead of a left, even though her sister told her to make a left. That's puzzling. Certainly not suspicious. Although maybe foul play was involved in her disappearance. I don't know how you equate that to her making a left or right turn. So likewise, maybe we might go in the other direction. I think that many of Unfound's listeners may look at the disappearance of Tom Brown. Of course, we now know that he is deceased. His remains were found. They think that his disappearance is very suspicious. I don't think it's suspicious. Brian Schaefer's, not suspicious. Holly White's is a very recent disappearance we covered on Unfound. Many people think of it as suspicious. I do not. And this, I think, comes with really knowing a lot about many disappearances and be able to use those to compare those to ones like these ones where a lot of people have been drawn to them and they come to their own conclusions and they think they're suspicious and they start concocting all these conspiracies. And when disappearances get solved, rarely is it some huge conspiracy. It's usually, in retrospect, very easy to understand. Keep that in mind. So once again, be very cautious of that word suspicious. Don't be sucked in. Don't be sucked in by those people. Other hosts who use, well, this is suspicious disappearance. I would reject it. I would think that, once again, it's a marketing term. Don't be marketed to. Do not allow yourself to be marketed to. All right, number 3, disappearances are about people. This is an idea I've been working on for a while. And what does it mean? If you listen to the Unfound regular podcast that appears on iTunes, Spotify, and elsewhere, you know it may be like an hour into an interview before we ever get to the day of the disappearance, before we start talking about those locations and witnesses and things like that. We take a lot of time to get to know that person. It's important to me, at least when I started Unfound, because I don't want anybody to just think about these cases as just cases. These are real people. Real people have been affected. We have guests who are never going to be the same. Even if their loved one is found and found alive, this is always going to be a mark on them for the rest of their lives. Okay, this is important. As we go on now, and we're moving up to our 6th anniversary of Unfound, what I now also know is that if I've pretty much gotten to the point, if you give me like the demographics of a person, how male or female, the age, work, do they have any addictions? Are they married? What kind of relationships and things? I don't need to know where they were. I don't need to know if they could drive or not. I don't need to know what time of day or not or anything, but probably with about 95% accuracy, I can tell you what happened. Disappearances. That's why I say disappearances are all about people. Maybe what I say here is demographics tell us most of what we need to know. Good example is the most recent disappearance I covered on Unfound, Milda McQuillan, who went missing from Minnesota in 1975. She was 71 years old. How do most people her age disappear? Usually by getting lost, by walking off, getting confused. They're not murdered. They're not, of course, not sex trafficked or anything like that. That's the number one way people of that age group go missing. So when it comes to the rest of her disappearance, her car being found on this deserted logging road out in the middle of nowhere, and some of her items hanging in the bushes, are there enough facts to pull me away from the idea that Milda just got lost, got confused, abandoned her car there, walked off, and just hasn't been found yet all these years later? In my opinion, for Milda's disappearance, no. For other people's opinions, they may differ. But this is how I now, today, go about looking at disappearances. What is the demographic of that person? What's going on in that person's life well before that person went missing? Now, if Milda had been 30, then we would certainly entertain different ideas. Why do 30-year-olds go missing? Usually suicide or foul play. Could be mental issues, certainly could be a lot of, but certainly not dementia or Alzheimer's or anything like that. So knowing a person's demographics, knowing what's going on in that person's life helps. Now, of course, for Greg, I did my best to try to find as much as I could about him. Not a lot out there. Might have been working in construction. We know he's a white guy. We know he's 61 years old. We know where he lived. Not sure if he was married or not. Don't know if he has any kids or anything, as far as I could tell. Tried to see if he was even born in California. Not sure about that. But we have to remember, for a guy in Greg's demographic, the most common reasons for death are disease and suicide. Certainly not foul play. We need to keep that in mind. We also have to factor in, for all of us, there are only so many people who we would call at 4 a.m. for help. So why is it that in this circle of friends, when we do get to the disappearance, that who would know Greg well enough, and this is more goes to who Greg is as a person, what kind of people would call Greg for help at 4 a.m.? Probably a family member, maybe a really, really good friend. But knowing more about Greg, we might be able to narrow that down to the people most likely to call him. But we have to also keep in mind, the most common reasons for disappearance is about around 60-year-old men, disease, and suicide. And we move on to this. If this was some sort of acquaintance, why hasn't this person come forward? Why hasn't this person been named? Why has this person not been quoted? Maybe this person caused the disappearance. Maybe, maybe not. But this would all be a lot clearer if we knew more just about Greg and what was going on in his life at the time. Maybe he was having a custody issue. Then we have to start considering that. Maybe he was having money issues. Maybe he'd been fighting suicidal thoughts and things. This would all factor into it. And we don't even know that his car was found on the 101. We don't need to know that he was called at 4 a.m. or was contacted at 4 a.m. We wouldn't need to know any of that. Knowing these other things about Greg himself would be enough. Now, as far as the fire goes, we have covered some disappearances that involved fires. Of course, Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman, that was the burning of a trailer. But we've covered 2 disappearances just off the top of my head that involved cars. Dorianne Myers, her car was found burned out many, many, many miles away from where she lived. Her house was also gutted. In fact, her house still exists, but it was gutted inside. And it's certainly believed that foul play was the cause for her disappearance. We have to keep in mind, the car was at a boat dock. It had been left there in the middle of the night where nobody would have been. It was not sitting along the road of the side of a road where everybody could see it. And then the other disappearance we covered where a car was burned out was Jeremy Burt's from Idaho. This is another one where foul play is certainly the number one idea, I think, in most people's minds. And his car was found, 100 miles away from where he lived, out in the middle of a field, not connected to him in any way. The car was totaled, totally trashed by a fire, and nobody believes that Jeremy did that. So that might factor into Greg's disappearance, being that we have 2 disappearances where foul play is believed to be the best answer in Dory's and Jeremy's disappearances. Maybe we need to think about that for Greg's. Maybe. But it all comes down to knowing Greg as best as we can, what was going on in his life. Now, my analysis, I will tell you this. We have no idea how he got contacted. I was thinking about this, that here I've lived in Florida for almost 11 years now. And I have many, many, many friends. And I have, of course, a brother and a sister-in-law who live not far from me as well. And still, there are only so many people who would contact me at 4 a.m. for help. I think my brother would. If his wife wasn't around, I think his wife, her name is Laureen, would contact me. If my brother was out of town or something, I'd probably be first on their lists. On everybody else's list, probably not. A lot of my friends here are married or have kids of a certain age into their 20s, that if these people get broken down, that's who they're going to be contacting. They're not going to be contacting me, although I certainly would love to help. So when we think about Greg, I think we have to think about him in the same way. There are only so many people who would have contacted him about having a problem. A very, very select group of people. So where are these people? Why aren't they quoted? What are people saying? You can't find anything on Facebook or anything else. Likewise, and it even is said unknown. Well, how do we know that he actually got contacted? Who did he tell this to? If Greg was living by himself, did he say it? Was he living with somebody? Did he tell his landlord? Who was this that he told? Oh, yeah, somebody contacted me. I got to go help this person. Well, did this other person hear the phone call? Did this person see the text, see the message? This is all very, very up in the air for me. On top of the fact is, why would Greg tell somebody, yeah, I'm going to help an acquaintance? Why not use this person's name? So I'm going to be honest with you. I have sincere doubts that this is even true. It very well may be that Greg was living with somebody and told somebody that. That doesn't mean that Greg was telling the truth. And in fact, I have to tell you, I'm inclined to believe that there is no foul play regarding any of this. And my first choice in this would be that something was going on with Greg personally. I've just seen this too many times where people said, oh, yeah, somebody contacted me. I need to go help that person. And the person never returns. And when the person is found deceased, the person made the whole story up. I have to go here, I have to go there. The person is never seen again. So that's, of course, would need a lot more information. I'd love to know cell phone information and things like that. But the kicker for me is somebody contacted him 4 a.m. Only so many people could have done that. And my guess is that Greg would have only gone to help certain people at 4 a.m. I have to admit, I'm ready here to help anybody, but somebody contacts me about going to help them at 4 a.m. and it's not really somebody I know that well, I'm going to be a little suspicious. I'm only like, can't you call AAA? Seriously, because you just never know. So I have a lot of sincere doubts about this entire story. I'm more inclined to believe that Greg just took off by himself and who told whoever that, yeah, I'm leaving because there's somebody broke down and I got to go help that person. And then he went and burned his car all on his own and probably walked off to parts unknown near where that car was found. That's my analysis. I, of course, can be wrong. As facts change, theories change. But at this time, 5-6 weeks after his disappearance, I'm pretty sure that's what happened. But maybe you have a different opinion. If you do, you can, of course, write that down in the comments section. And that's all I have for this episode of Unfound Now, covering the disappearance of Greg Peterson, who disappeared on July 17th of 2022 from near Cloverdale, California. Thanks for watching. See ya.